He scoffed at the woman who raised him, called her weak for clinging to the past. But the past had teeth, and when he followed the trail of her name to a forgotten deed buried beneath dust and contempt, he realized too late what she'd sacrificed to protect it. The slap cracked through the parlor loud enough to startle the dog from under the stove. Clara Hollis didn't move. Her cheek reddened, but her spine stayed straight as she faced her son across the narrow kitchen. Elijah stood shaking, fist half raised like he wasn't sure whether to strike again or fall apart where he stood. His eyes, blue like his father's but colder, glinted with frustration, anger, and something deeper, something like shame. "You lied to me," he hissed. "All these years you sat in this house, just a widow, just a washed-out farmer's wife, and you never told me about the land, about the deed, about what you've been hiding." Clara's voice was low, steady. "Because it wasn't yours to know, Elijah, not yet." "Not yet," he laughed bitterly. "I left this place to build something. I came back because I thought maybe you needed help. Turns out you've been sitting on land worth more than every contract I've worked in the last 5 years combined." Clara didn't flinch. She simply wiped her hands on her apron and moved toward the stove, like his outburst was no different than the kettle boiling over. But Elijah saw it, that slight tremble in her fingers, the way her jaw tensed just before she turned. He wasn't a boy anymore, and he could see her now not just as a mother, but as a woman carrying something far heavier than grief. The deed had surfaced 3 nights earlier, found not by Clara but by Elijah's wandering curiosity. A yellowed envelope tucked inside the back of her Bible, buried beneath pages stiff with time and tears. The name on it wasn't his father's, it was hers. Clara A. Hollis, owner of parcel 17 through 22 of the Coldridge Silver Line, an old mining claim abandoned years ago and presumed worthless. Only it was. Rumors had stirred recently about a vein running deeper, untouched by the first dig, waiting beneath bedrock. That vein, by surveyors' records, ran straight through her land. "I worked for scraps out west while you sat here holding gold," Elijah snapped. "Why didn't you sell? Why didn't you use it?" Clara turned slowly. "Because some things ain't meant to be dug up." The room went still. Outside, the wind pushed against the eaves, whispering warnings in voices only old timbers could understand. Elijah felt it then, that something was off. Not just the lie, not just the years of silence. There was history here, coiled tight like a rattler behind a rock, and his mother was guarding it like it might strike if uncovered too fast. He stormed out before she could say more, boots slamming against wood as he marched down the porch steps into the yard. The barn loomed in the distance, sagging but sturdy, and beyond it the hills stretched, cold and bare, toward the old silver line. Elijah's thoughts raced. That land could change everything, not just for him but for both of them. He could build real wealth now. He could stake something permanent. He just needed to get her out of the way. But as he walked, a memory clawed its way out from the back of his mind. A night long ago, the sound of men's voices, low and angry, and Clara locking the door with shaking hands while telling him to stay quiet. He'd been young, maybe 8 or 9, and afterward she told him it was nothing, just a drunk at the wrong door. But that wasn't true. And now he wondered, had it been about the land even then? Back in the house, Clara stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the envelope Elijah had left on the table. Her fingers hovered over it but didn't touch. She didn't need to. She knew what it said, knew what it meant, and knew what Elijah would do with it if she didn't stop him. Night fell fast, as it did in Coldridge Valley, the dark pressing close like it was trying to listen. Elijah rode out before dawn the next day, saying nothing to her, his saddle bags packed light but determined. He said he was going to town. He didn't say why. Clara didn't ask, but she watched him disappear down the trail with a heaviness in her chest she hadn't felt since burying her husband. He reached Coldridge an hour past noon, the town a rough sprawl of saloons, livery stables, and surveyor tents strung along the main road like teeth in a broken jaw. He went straight to the land office, slapped the deed on the counter, and demanded answers. The clerk, a wiry man with ink-stained fingers, paled slightly when he read the name. "You say this is yours?" he asked, squinting up at Elijah. "It's my mother's," Elijah replied. "I'm her only son. I'm handling the sale." The clerk hesitated. "These plots, they're under dispute." "What kind of dispute?" The man's eyes darted. "Ownership. Surveyor's records don't match county files. There was a redraw after the war. And well, someone else filed a claim, just yesterday, actually." Elijah stiffened. "Who?" The man flipped the ledger. "James C. Bannock, lawyer out of Auburn Ridge, says he's representing a prior heir. Came in with a counterdeed, said the original owner passed the claim to a partner before dying. Partner died with no will. It's murky. You'll need to settle it in court." Elijah's mouth went dry. Bannock. He knew the name. A man who built a reputation stealing land through loopholes, bribery, and broken promises. If Bannock was involved, this wasn't about mistakes. It was a move, a coordinated one. He left the office seething. That night he sat in the tavern with a whiskey burning in his gut and hate clenching his jaw. He thought of his mother, how calm she'd been, how still. She knew Bannock would come. Maybe she'd always known. Maybe that's why she kept the land quiet, not out of fear, out of protection. And suddenly he didn't feel angry anymore. He felt stupid. He went back to the room he'd rented above the general store and opened the envelope again, staring at the deed until his eyes blurred. There were notes on the back. Names. A date, April 7, 1859. A scrawled word, promise. And next to it a second sheet, folded smaller like it was never meant to be seen. It wasn't a map. It was a letter. Elijah unfolded it with shaking hands. His mother's handwriting, younger, stronger. "If anything happens to me, give this to Elijah when he's ready. The land isn't just ours, it's blood-bound, protected by agreement, watched by those who don't forget. If he tries to take it by force, they'll come. If he earns it with honor, they'll help. Clara." He read it twice, then again. The words didn't make sense, but they felt true, the kind of true that curled in your chest and refused to loosen. Suddenly everything shifted. This wasn't about silver, it wasn't even about money. Something happened on that land, something bigger than deeds and surveys, and his mother had stood between it and the world for decades. Elijah didn't sleep that night. By morning, the sky was the color of old tin, and the wind carried the bite of distant snow. He rode back before sunup, breath fogging with each mile, heart pounding harder the closer he got to the ridge. But when he arrived, the house was empty. The door hung open, the stove cold. Clara's apron was folded neatly on the table and the Bible, with the deed, was gone. And out by the old trail leading toward the Coldridge line, fresh horse tracks marked the snow. He wasn't alone in this anymore. The snow hadn't fallen heavy, but just enough to mark time, a record of hooves cutting toward Coldridge Ridge with purpose. Elijah crouched beside the tracks, breath sharp in the morning air, eyes narrowing as the pattern unfolded. Not just Clara's mare. There was another set alongside it, lighter, slower, as if someone had been trailing behind, watching. He rose slowly, his hand brushing the grip of his revolver out of instinct, not intent. This wasn't the kind of trail you rode into wild, not when you didn't understand what waited at the end. His mind spun. Who had taken her, or worse, who had she gone with? The wind curled against his collar as he saddled up and started after the tracks. Each crunch of hoof against frost cracked through the silence like a warning. He tried not to think about the letter, about her words. If he tries to take it by force, they'll come. It was madness, but he felt it now. Not fear, something older. He'd mocked her, yes, mocked her for being small, for surviving quietly, for living in a house that sagged with stories instead of moving forward. But maybe she'd been standing still not out of weakness, but on purpose, guarding something. He remembered the old stories his father used to half-whisper when whiskey loosened his tongue, about Coldridge being cursed, about men who'd gone looking for silver and come back hollow-eyed or never come back at all. Elijah had laughed back then, called them ghost tales for fools, but those tracks didn't feel like a ghost story. They felt real, sharp, deliberate. By mid-morning, the trail crested the ridge. Elijah slowed his horse, standing in his stirrups to scan the horizon. There, near the edge of the ravine, stood an old shack, the kind surveyors used before the mines went dry. Smoke twisted from the chimney. Someone was inside. He tied his horse low behind a cluster of scrub pines and approached on foot, boots quiet against the frost-packed ground. As he neared the shack, he heard voices, one low, measured male, the other his mother. "She's bluffing," the man said. "That deed won't hold. Bannock's got his hooks in the judge. You hand it over now, I might be able to keep him from dragging your name through the mud." "I've been dragged before," Clara replied. "Didn't kill me." Elijah's chest tightened. "You think your boy's gonna come running?" the man asked. "He's just like the others, greedy, easy to steer. He'll fold like the rest, or he'll vanish and you'll be here alone, again." "He's not like the others," she said quietly. "Not anymore." Elijah stepped into view then, boots crunching deliberately. The man inside the shack turned fast, thin, wiry, clean-shaven except for a mean scar along his jaw. He was dressed too neat for this part of the territory. The kind of neat that meant trouble. "You Bannock?" Elijah asked flatly. The man smirked, friend of his. Elijah's eyes flicked to Clara, who stood calmly near the stove, a kettle in one hand, a pistol in the other, held low but steady. "She's got something you want?" Elijah asked, stepping further into the room. The man's eyes didn't leave him, just business. "No," Elijah said, voice hardening. "That's where you're wrong." It happened fast. The man lunged, Clara's pistol barked, the kettle crashed. Elijah ducked instinctively and tackled him hard into the wall. The man swung a wild punch, caught Elijah in the jaw, but Elijah was younger, angrier, and not above learning things the hard way. They crashed through the door and into the snow, fists flying, breath steaming. The man cursed, clawed for his coat, and that's when Elijah saw the glint, steel flashing low at the belt. Clara fired again. The bullet split the air between them and buried itself in the ground just inches from the man's hand. He froze. "Try again," she said, eyes steel. "See what happens." He went pale, then ran. Elijah lay in the snow for a moment, panting, face bleeding from a split lip, hands raw. Clara stepped out beside him and offered a hand. He took it without a word. Inside, she poured water into the cracked basin and pressed a cloth to his face. He winced. "You shouldn't have come after me," she said quietly. "You shouldn't have gone alone," he replied. They sat for a moment, the silence dense but not empty, not anymore. "I read your letter," Elijah said finally, "the one you tucked with the deed." Clara didn't respond. "What does it mean, blood-bound, watched by those who don't forget?" Clara turned slowly, folding the cloth. "When your father and I came to Coldridge, the land was dead. Silver had dried up, but he found something different, not just ore. A cavern system beneath the ridge, older than anything the surveyors mapped, and within it carvings, objects, bones." "Bones," Elijah echoed. "Not animal," she said. "Not native either. The judge who filed the deed wasn't just a clerk. He was part of something bigger, a society of sorts. They believed certain lands held history, power, and that power shouldn't be sold." Elijah stared. "That's why you never used the deed." She nodded. "Because if you try to profit off the land, something wakes up. That's what happened to the first crew. Every man who tried to drill deeper than the marked line came back wrong. Sick. Some vanished. Your father never went down there. He made a pact instead, buried the entrance, swore the deed would stay sealed." "And Bannock?" Clara's face darkened. "His people think the curse is superstition. They want what's buried, not for silver, for what's beneath it. They've been circling for years." Elijah's pulse thudded. "So why now?" "Because the town's dying," she said. "Land values dropped. No one's paying attention. It's the perfect time to sneak a claim through." Elijah looked at the stove, at the cracks in the walls. at the years she'd spent defending this invisible line between safety and something darker. "What happens if they get it?" he asked. "They won't," she said simply. "But what if they already have a way in?" Clara met his gaze, her own full of quiet fire. "Then we stop them together." Later that night they returned home, both silent on the ride back. But when Elijah stabled the horse and stepped onto the porch, he saw something that stopped him cold. The door was open again. Not swung wide, just ajar, like someone had been inside or was still there. He drew his revolver slowly, motioned for Clara to stay behind. She shook her head and followed. The house was empty, or seemed so at first. Nothing broken, nothing taken. Then Elijah stepped into the back room, and his breath caught. The floorboards had been pried up. Beneath them, where the old cellar stairs lay rotting in darkness, something glowed faintly. Not gold, not silver. Blue. Pulsing. Alive. They stared into the cellar in silence, mother and son, one breath apart, both tethered to something they could no longer pretend wasn't real. The pulsing blue light below wasn't constant. It throbbed faintly, like a slow heartbeat, as though the very earth beneath them was trying to wake. Elijah's hands were tight around the doorframe. Clara's fingers trembled just slightly where they hovered near her waist. The light wasn't natural. It couldn't be. No lantern burned that color. No fire shimmered like that. And yet there it was, shining up from the floor of a house that had no right to hold something so ancient and alive. "When did you last open it?" Elijah asked, voice low. Clara shook her head. "Not since your father died." He turned sharply. "And you never told me this was here." "It wasn't something to tell," she said quietly. "It was something to guard." Elijah stepped back, one hand still on the frame. He remembered the nights when he was a boy, the sounds he'd heard in the floorboards below, scratching, sometimes whispering, but always dismissed by Clara as the wind or old timber. He'd believed her, because what else could a child do but believe the woman who fed him and prayed over him and told him monsters weren't real? But monsters, he was starting to realize, didn't always have claws or fangs. Sometimes they came in deeds, in greed, in secrets so old they were carved into stone. "We need to see what's down there," Elijah said. Clara flinched. "No. You can't keep hiding it." "I'm not hiding it," she said, her voice sharp now. "I'm protecting it. And you." Elijah turned toward her fully. "From what?" She looked at him, eyes suddenly hollow. "From what I saw once and swore never to see again." And just like that, the air shifted. The wind outside whined low through the cracks in the siding. The lamps flickered. Clara reached forward, gripped the door, and slammed it shut. The blue glow disappeared like breath sucked from a room. She locked the cellar with a rusted iron latch Elijah hadn't noticed before, one shaped not like a hook but a key. He didn't press her, not yet. But that night he didn't sleep. He sat on the porch while the stars crawled across the sky and the cold turned the ground brittle. He stared at the trail that led up into the hills, the one he used to ride as a boy before the mine closed. He thought about what his mother had said, about what his father had found, about the men Bannock had likely already sent sniffing around. By dawn, Elijah made up his mind. Whether Clara opened the door or not, he would find answers. If something was waking, someone had to be ready. 2 days passed in a strange quiet. Clara returned to her chores as though nothing had changed. Elijah helped, but unease sat thick between them. The cellar remained locked. The deed stayed hidden, and Bannock did not return. But others did. It started with hoofprints, 5 sets, riding hard through the woods, circling the property, then vanishing east. Then came the knocking once, late at night, sharp and purposeful, but no one stood at the door when Elijah opened it. And finally, on the 3rd day, the sign, a dead crow nailed to the barn door with a rusted railroad spike. Its wings were cut off, its beak sewn shut with horsehair. Clara found it first. She didn't scream. She didn't even curse. She simply reached for the old double-barrel shotgun that hadn't been fired since the war and loaded both chambers with salt and buckshot. "They're sending warnings," she said. "Why not just come?" Elijah asked. "Because they're not after us," she answered. "They're after the Watchers." Elijah hesitated. "The what?" Clara turned to him, face pale. "I told you the land was protected, but protection isn't just a promise, it's a pact. When your father found that cavern, he left something behind, a piece of himself, and in return they left us alone as long as we didn't disturb what sleeps." Elijah swallowed hard, "And now Bannock's trying to dig it up." She nodded, "And the Watchers are stirring." That night, Elijah returned to the cellar while Clara slept. He pried the latch with a crowbar, ignoring the cold sweat that soaked the back of his shirt. He descended the steps with a lantern in hand, each board groaning beneath his weight like bones complaining after long rest. The cellar had changed. The dirt floor was damp not from rain but from something else, something older. The glow had returned, faint but steady, radiating from a fissure in the stone wall near the rear. The crack hadn't been there before, or if it had never glowed. Elijah knelt beside it, held the lantern low. Inside he saw shapes, not stones, not roots, shapes carved by hand, symbols, eyes. And in the center, a mark he recognized from the deed, an interlocked triangle and circle, etched deep in iron. He reached out, touched the symbol. The light flared. For a heartbeat, everything vanished, sight, sound, air. Elijah was falling through blackness, then fire, then water. Screams filled his ears, not from outside but from inside, his own memories twisted, shattered, rebuilt. A man's voice, one he'd never heard, whispered in a language he didn't understand. Something ancient, something pleading. Not yet, not ready, not him. And then silence. He gasped, fell back, the lantern clattering beside him. The light had dimmed. The crack was no longer pulsing, and the mark had changed. Where once it had been only a symbol, now it bore a name. Elijah Holly's, etched as though it had always been there. He stumbled up the stairs, slamming the cellar door behind him, panting. Clara met him in the kitchen, her face pale. She didn't ask what he'd seen. She didn't need to. "They chose you," she said. He stared. "What?" "You touched the stone," she said. "You weren't supposed to, but now you carry it. The Watchers won't come for me anymore. They'll come for you." "But why? I didn't do anything." "You claimed the land. Not with a deed, with blood. That's how they see it." Elijah felt something shift in his chest, panic, dread, awe. He had mocked her, for being just a widow, for being weak. But now he stood trembling under the weight of a name etched in stone by hands older than history. He didn't sleep that night. The wind howled like wolves circling something wounded, and in the distance through the trees he swore he saw fire, low, flickering and moving. Not torches. Eyes. The Watchers were coming. The Watchers did not arrive with thunder or war cries. They came quietly. That was worse. It began with the cattle refusing to graze. Clara noticed first. Then the birds stopped landing on the fence posts. Then the dog, a mutt that had followed Elijah since he was 13, refused to cross the threshold of the barn. It stood at the edge of the yard and howled all night. Elijah tried to pretend the mark on the cellar wall didn't burn, but it did. He hadn't spoken to Clara about what he saw, not fully. Not about the voice, not about the vision, not about how he'd felt something choose him. Not in words, at least. But she knew. Of course she knew. Her eyes watched him like a mother watches a dying fire, knowing it might gutter out or explode into something uncontrollable. The Watchers weren't men. That much became clear. Men didn't move through trees without sound. Men didn't leave footprints that faced the wrong direction. And men didn't know your name before you ever said it aloud. Elijah first saw them on the fourth night. He woke to the sound of whispering. The words weren't English, weren't even human. They were dry like leaves scraped against stone. When he rose and looked out the window, he saw them, figures standing just beyond the tree line, tall and thin, heads bent unnaturally, arms long enough to brush the snow without bending. There were 4 of them just standing, not approaching. Watching. He didn't tell Clara, not that morning. Instead, he spent the hours chopping wood he didn't need, hauling water they'd already drawn, anything to keep his hands busy. Clara worked quietly beside him, her silence more loaded than any accusation. It was just past midday when the rider came. Elijah saw him first, a dark smear on the trail beyond the ridge, riding fast, dust rising behind like smoke. Elijah stepped onto the porch and narrowed his eyes. The man was dressed in black, face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat, coat flapping like a flag of warning. He didn't slow until he reached the yard, and even then he didn't dismount. "Name S. Priest," the man said, voice low, almost amused. "I represent Mr. Bannock." Clara appeared behind Elijah before he could speak. Her arms were folded, her face carved from stone. "You tell Bannock this land ain't for sale," she said flatly. The man tipped his hat. "Ma'am, I'm not here for negotiation, I'm here for resolution. Bannock knows the deed's binding. He also knows you've awoken certain interests. That complicates things." "Does it?" Elijah said, stepping forward. "And what exactly do you mean by interests?" Priest smiled. It wasn't kind. "Let's not play dumb, son. The Watchers don't just wake up because someone scratches their name in stone. Something stirred beneath that cellar, something old. You broke the seal, you bear the mark, and now Bannock wants the land before it decides to eat you whole." Elijah's breath caught. He believes in the Watchers. "Oh, he doesn't believe, he knows. Belief is for folks with doubt. Bannock's got certainty, and he's willing to burn the valley to ash to get what's underneath." Elijah's fists clenched. "Then he'll have to come himself." "Oh, he will," Priest said, "but when he does, he won't knock." And then the man rode off. That night Clara didn't sleep. Neither did Elijah. They sat at the kitchen table long past midnight, a shotgun and 2 revolvers between them, oil lamp flickering, the wind pressing hard against the window panes. "He's going to try to take it," Elijah said. Clara nodded. "He always was." Elijah turned toward her. "Why didn't you tell me about the cavern, about the Watchers, about any of it?" Clara's eyes were hollow but dry. "Because you were too much like him." Elijah flinched. "My father." She shook her head. "No, Bannock, hungry, arrogant, certain you understood everything you saw." Elijah looked away. "You left," she said softly. "You left me here to carry it alone. And when you came back, you mocked me, mocked the house, mocked the land, called me just a widow. And still I kept your name off the deed, to protect you." "I thought you were hiding weakness," Elijah said. "Turns out you were hiding strength." The silence between them wasn't warm, but it wasn't cold either. It was the silence of truth. At dawn, the Watchers were gone from the trees. Elijah hoped it meant they'd left. Clara knew better. "They've gone to prepare," she said. "They don't fight like men, they wait, they measure, they test." "For what?" "For your worth." Elijah paced the floor. "If they want to test me, fine, but I'm not letting Bannock burn this place to the ground." Clara studied him a long time. "Then you'd better decide what you're willing to give up." The attack came 2 days later. It wasn't guns first, it was smoke. Elijah woke choking, flames licking at the edges of the barn. He ran barefoot through the frost, pulling buckets, slapping at sparks, dragging the dog free just before the roof collapsed. Clara helped, silent and fierce, hands blistered but unflinching. Then came the second fire, set to the shed, then the fences, then the well. They were surrounded. Slowly Bannock's men moved closer, not with bullets but with fear. "You think we can scare Watchers?" Elijah asked Clara after the 3rd night without sleep. "They're not scaring them," she replied. "They're scaring us." The next morning, Elijah rode into Coldridge. Not to fight. To find the judge. His name was Thorne. An old man with eyes like soot and hands that shook when he poured coffee. He'd been the one to sign the original deed. He was the last one left who knew what Coldridge Ridge truly held. "You shouldn't have come here," Thorne said without looking up. "I don't want the land," Elijah said. "I want the truth." The judge stared a long time, then slid a folder across the table. Inside were photographs, black and white, faded, blurry, but clear enough. Images of carvings, of bones, of men standing with shovels and fear in their eyes. "There's something beneath Coldridge," Thorne said. "Something not meant to be disturbed. We tried once. My brother went first. He never came back the same. He drew pictures for weeks. Pictures of things with mouths in places no mouth should be. And Bannock. He wants to sell it as a mineral vein, but he knows it's not." "Then why now?" Thorne looked at him. "Because he found something else. A key. Your father hid it. Bannock's men dug it up, and now they think they can open the deeper chamber." Elijah stood. "Then I need to stop him." Thorne's voice was barely above a whisper. "If you go down there, Elijah, don't go looking for silver." Back home, the storm had already begun. The sky was orange with fire. Bannock's men had surrounded the house. Clara stood on the porch, shotgun in hand, her apron soaked with ash and grit. She didn't flinch. Elijah rode in hard, scattering two of the men, leapt from the saddle, and slammed through the front door. "They're going for the cavern," he said. "They've got the key." Clara turned slowly. "Then you know what you have to do." He nodded. He reached for the lantern, for the rope, for the letter. And then he opened the cellar. Below, the light had returned, brighter now, stronger, like it knew the end was close. He descended into the dark. The first thing he noticed was the silence. Not the kind you find in deep woods or snowy meadows, but a silence that seemed to press against the ears like weight, thick, humming, suffocating. Elijah descended the stairs, each step groaning under his boots, lantern casting long, twitching shadows across the cellar walls. The air was colder than before. Not the natural cold of stone and earth, but something older, almost sterile, like the breath of something that had never known sunlight. The crack in the stone wall at the back of the cellar had widened since the last time he'd come down. What had once been a thin fissure now yawned like a jagged mouth, wide enough for a man to crawl through if he dared. That pulsing blue light still emanated from within, steady now, as if it had been waiting for him, not beckoning, summoning. He crouched at the threshold, his breath visible in the air, heart hammering a rhythm too fast for his chest. The rope was tied around his waist, the other end looped around a beam upstairs. Clara had insisted. "If you scream," she'd said, "I'm coming down. But if I pull once and you don't answer, I'm cutting the rope and sealing the door." He hadn't asked if she was serious. Elijah ducked low and crawled into the dark. The passage narrowed at first, barely wider than his shoulders, the stone cold and damp beneath his palms. The blue light danced ahead of him, always just out of reach, as if guiding him deeper. The air grew thicker, heavy with the scent of minerals and something else, something sweet, almost rotting. Then the passage opened suddenly, without warning, into a cavern wide enough to swallow the cabin above. He rose to his feet slowly, eyes scanning the walls. The chamber was domed, the stone slick with moisture. Carvings stretched from floor to ceiling, symbols, spirals, shapes that seemed to move if he looked too long. Bones lay scattered across the floor, old and brittle, untouched by animals. Human, dozens of them. In the center of the chamber stood a stone pillar, waist-high, and atop it, embedded in a shallow indentation, lay the key. It wasn't metal. It looked carved from bone, polished smooth, the same interlocked triangle and circle etched into its handle. Elijah stepped toward it, hand trembling. As he reached out, a sound filled the chamber, a low hum, like 1,000 voices whispering from deep underwater. The second his fingers touched the key, the floor beneath him shifted. Not cracked, shifted, like something turning in its sleep. The light flared, blue becoming violet, then white-hot. Elijah staggered back, clutching the key, vision swimming. And then he heard them. Voices not in the chamber but inside him, behind the eyes, beneath the skin. You were not chosen, you were warned. He fell to his knees, the voices tearing through him like wind through broken glass. Greed opens the gate, love pays the price, choose. Elijah screamed, but no sound left his lips, just heat, just pain, and then stillness. He opened his eyes. The chamber was empty again, the light gone, but the key remained clutched in his hand, warm now, as if alive. He crawled back through the tunnel, legs weak, lungs burning. Clara stood waiting at the top of the stairs, rope taut in her grip, face pale. She didn't speak, just helped him up and shut the cellar door behind him. "What did you see?" she asked. He shook his head. "Nothing I can explain, but I have the key." She nodded, quietly setting a kettle on the stove. "They said something, said I had to choose." She paused. "What did you choose?" "I don't know," he admitted. "I think that's what scares me most." By morning, Bannock had arrived. He didn't sneak. He didn't send riders. He came in a black coach drawn by 6 horses, flanked by hired guns with eyes like wolves. He stood on the porch like a man who believed in nothing but his own right to take. "Elijah," he said, removing his hat. "Clara." Clara didn't speak. Her hand rested on the butt of the shotgun. "You've caused quite a stir," Bannock continued. "I've had to explain to my investors that the land's tied up in legacy nonsense, that the widow won't sign, that her sons had a change of heart." "I haven't changed," Elijah said. "I've just seen what's beneath it all." Bannock smiled. "Then you know why I need it." "You don't need it," Elijah said. "You want it, there's a difference." "You think this is about money?" Bannock asked, stepping closer. "This is about history, legacy. You and your mother are standing on something older than the war, older than the country, something that can't be replicated or rebuilt, and it's mine." Clara stepped forward. "It was never yours, not in blood, not in name, and certainly not in spirit." Bannock's smile faded. "Then this is your final warning." He turned and left. The sound of hooves echoed long after the coach disappeared down the trail. Elijah turned to Clara. "He'll come back." "Yes," she said, "but so will they." That night the watchers returned. Not in the woods, in the house. Elijah woke to find one standing in the corner of his room. It didn't move, didn't breathe, just watched. Its face was blank, no eyes, no mouth, just smooth skin stretched tight over bone. He couldn't speak, couldn't scream. He rose slowly, every part of him shaking. The thing tilted its head, not curious, expectant. Then it whispered, "You carry the key, but do you carry the burden?" Elijah stepped closer. "What are you?" It didn't answer, just pointed to his chest, to his heart. "The gate opens through loss. The land remembers." Then it vanished. No smoke, no sound, just gone. Elijah sank to the floor. In the morning, Clara found him pale and fevered. "They're in the house," he said. "I know," she replied. He handed her the key. "They want me to give it up." Clara looked at the bone object in her palm. "That's not what they want." "Then what?" She looked at him with tears in her eyes. "They want us to understand, before it's too late." Bannock returned that evening, with fire. Guns rang out, windows shattered, men shouted, kicked down the door. Elijah and Clara fought like cornered wolves. Bullets flew, walls splintered. The dog leapt from the stairs, tearing into the first man who crossed the threshold. Then Elijah saw him, Bannock, standing in the doorway, revolver drawn, coat soaked with rain and soot. "You should have stayed gone," Bannock snarled. "You should have stayed dead," Elijah shot back. They fired at the same time. Bannock missed, Elijah didn't. The man crumpled without a sound, eyes wide in disbelief. But even in death the fire didn't stop. The cabin burned. Elijah dragged Clara outside. The night was thick with smoke and ash. The watchers stood in a circle around the house, unmoving, eyes glowing faintly. Clara fell to her knees. "It's done," she whispered. "It's all gone." "No," Elijah said, clutching the key. "Not yet." He turned toward the ridge, toward the cavern, toward whatever came next. The land had changed. Elijah could feel it beneath his boots as he climbed the ridge, Clara's hand clutched tight in his, the sky red and swollen behind them. The fire had devoured the cabin, but even the blaze seemed small compared to the force moving underneath the soil, like a breath held too long now exhaling through every creak of wood, every shift of rock. The watchers didn't follow, but neither did they vanish. They simply stood in the field, unmoving, their eyes reflecting the firelight as if waiting for something neither Clara nor Elijah could name. They climbed in silence. There were no words left, no comfort to offer, only this, the path forward. The key pulsed warm in Elijah's hand, not painfully but insistently, like a heartbeat that had once belonged to something very much alive. Behind them the world burned. Ahead the mountain waited. At the ridge, where the pines grew thin and the trail dropped into the old mine basin, Elijah stopped. The mine had been closed since he was 10, after a cave-in killed 2 men and sent a third back up screaming about voices in the stone. They'd sealed the shaft with iron and prayer, boarded it with hickory, and left the signs to rot. He remembered standing here once, small and unsure, while his father stared down the dark like it had asked him a question only he could hear. Now Elijah heard it too. The boards had been pried back. Not cleanly, not recently. This was Bannock's doing. The wood was splintered, old nails curled like claws, and beneath them the earth was wet and slick. The opening yawned wide, black as pitch, and from within came a wind that didn't smell of stone or rot, but memory. Elijah turned to Clara. "You don't have to come." She shook her head. "I've come this far. I'm not letting you carry the end of this alone." Together they stepped into the dark. The descent was slow. Elijah led, lantern high, while Clara held the rope wound around his waist. The mine's main shaft dropped steeply, walls carved roughly by old pickaxes and desperation. Once, long ago, men had believed they could tame this place. That silver could be pulled from its heart like gold from fire. But the mine had never wanted to be opened. It had allowed itself to be tapped briefly and then swallowed those who came too close. At the first junction, they saw the signs. Marks on the walls. Not human. Thin, jagged cuts in spiraling patterns, like someone had taken a blade to the very stone and let it bleed symbols. The deeper they went, the more frequent they became, until the stone pulsed faintly with a dull red glow, barely visible but growing stronger with each step. And then they reached the door. It wasn't a door in the traditional sense. It was a wall of stone shaped to appear as if it had once been closed and opened, sealed not with hinges but will. In the center was the mark Elijah had come to recognize, the triangle and circle, interlocked and ancient. Below it was a small indentation, bone-shaped. Elijah raised the key. The stone began to hum. Clara stepped back as Elijah placed the key into the slot. For a moment nothing happened. Then the hum grew louder. The markings on the wall flared, glowing white-hot, and with a sound like thunder beneath water the door moved. It slid down into the earth, revealing a passage not carved but grown, like the mountain had hollowed itself deliberately, long before men knew how to dig. Elijah stepped forward. The tunnel curved inward, deeper than any shaft should have reached. The walls shimmered faintly, slick with veins of some mineral that pulsed with an unnatural light. He moved by instinct now. The key had disappeared into the wall behind him, yet something still guided him, whispers just beyond comprehension, a pull behind his ribs. And then they reached the heart. It wasn't a room. It was a chamber of stone and water and time. The walls stretched impossibly high, disappearing into a black ceiling lined with stars that weren't stars. In the center stood a platform, and upon it, a sarcophagus, formed from the same bone-white stone as the key, etched with symbols that spun slowly beneath their eyes, as though refusing to be truly seen. Elijah approached it slowly. Clara hung back, her breath ragged. "What is it?" he whispered. Before she could answer, the watchers appeared. They didn't enter. They didn't need to. They stood in the walls, in the floor, in the ceiling, their forms pressed thin and long against the stone, their faces turned inward, watching with mouths that didn't open and eyes that didn't blink. Then one stepped forward. It did not walk, it became. Where there was empty space, there was now presence. A figure, faceless and silent but unmistakably aware. It looked at Elijah, then at Clara. And then it spoke. Not with sound, but with memory. Elijah gasped. He was a child again, running through the orchard outside the house, chasing shadows that whispered his name. He was 10, standing by the mine when the ground shook. He was 20, laughing in a saloon, mocking the woman who raised him. He was 30, kneeling beside his dying father, holding his hand as he begged forgiveness for a deed never spoken. The watcher showed him everything. The truth his parents never said, the deal made before he was born, the pact signed in blood and silence. "This land is bound by name," the voice said, "and the name is yours." "What do you want from me?" Elijah gasped. "Joyce." The sarcophagus cracked. Elijah turned, heart pounding, as the lid slid away to reveal a body wrapped in crimson cloth, skin pale and untouched by time. A woman, young, ageless, her eyes opened, blue as the stone, wide and full of sorrow. Clara choked on a sob. "No." Elijah stared. You know her." Clara dropped to her knees. "She was my sister." Elijah's mind reeled. The woman sat up, and with her motion came a wind like a sigh from the beginning of time. "I am what was bound," she said. "I am what was left to sleep so the world could turn without forgetting, but the world has forgotten." Elijah stepped forward. "Why me?" "Because you remembered. Because your name was written in stone when your father gave up everything to keep me hidden. Because you carry both the curse and the key." Clara's face crumpled. "You said she died. You said you buried her." "I buried the truth," she whispered, "to protect you, to protect her." The woman rose from the stone, barefoot, untouched by the dust. She walked to Elijah and placed a hand over his heart. "What lives beneath this land is not meant to be owned. It is meant to be held by those who choose legacy over gain, memory over profit, family over power." "What do I do?" Elijah asked. "Seal it," she said, "with your name, with your choice." "And if I do?" The chamber darkened. The watchers leaned closer. The woman's voice hardened. "Then all who have forgotten will remember, too late." Elijah closed his eyes. He saw Clara, hands in the earth, burying letters she never sent. He saw his father kneeling before this same stone, whispering promises to a force no man could understand. He saw himself, child, man, failure, heir, not to riches, but to a secret the world had tried to bury. He opened his eyes and chose. He knelt before the stone and placed both hands on it. "I bind this land to the name Elijah Hollies," he said, "not for wealth, not for glory, but for memory, for family, for the debt we owe the forgotten." The watchers closed their eyes. The light faded. The chamber shuddered. And the mountain exhaled. When Elijah awoke, he was lying at the edge of the mine. Clara sat beside him, holding his hand, her face streaked with ash and tears. The shaft was gone. Not sealed. Gone. As if it had never been. The watchers were gone too, so was the key, and the stars above seemed just a little brighter. They rode back in silence. The land was quiet now. The fire had passed. Bannock's body had been taken by his men, what few of them had stayed. The rest had fled. The valley was empty again. But not hollow. They rebuilt the cabin, slowly together, No grand structures, no monuments. Just home. Elijah didn't speak much in those first weeks, but when he did, it was only to say her name, the woman beneath the stone. His aunt, Clara's sister, a part of their family lost to time, now returned not in body but in truth. The land remained theirs, not through papers or courts. Through choice. Through memory. Through name. Spring did not return in a rush. It crept in cautiously, like a visitor who'd once been turned away. Grass began to push through the blackened edges of the fire line. The apple trees, long dormant, gave off cautious green buds, as if unsure whether they were safe to bloom again. And for the first time since Elijah had returned to Coldridge, the wind carried warmth rather than warnings. Life resumed, but not the life that had been before. Elijah rebuilt the cabin with his own hands, plank by plank, stone by stone. Clara worked beside him, hammering as if every nail was a word unspoken, every board a memory finally set in place. They didn't talk about what had happened in the mine, not in detail. Some truths were too big for retelling, but the silence between them was no longer full of fear or resentment. It had weight, but it wasn't heavy. It had space. They didn't speak of Bannock either. His men had taken what was left of him and scattered like vultures disturbed at a carcass. No one returned. No one dared. Word traveled fast in the hills, faster than any horse, and when it traveled, it changed. People began saying Coldridge was cursed again, that fire and ghosts and blood had claimed the ridge, and nothing good would ever grow there again. Most folks avoided it entirely. Elijah preferred it that way. He no longer felt like a man exiled. He felt like a man entrusted. There was a difference. Each morning he walked the edge of the property, boots sinking into the thawing earth, checking fences that hadn't been touched, tools left neatly in their places. The watchers were gone, but he didn't believe they had truly left. Not gone, just still. Like sentries waiting in the soil, waiting for another name, another choice, another wound to split open something better left sealed. One morning, near the end of April, Clara brought him a bundle wrapped in faded oilcloth. "What's this?" he asked, setting his hammer down. "Something your father wanted you to have," she said. "I never gave it to you. I thought he was wrong. I thought he saw too much of himself in you." Elijah took the bundle and sat on the porch, unwrapping it slowly. Inside was a journal, leather-bound and heavy with dust. He recognized the handwriting before he opened it, his father's, but the first page wasn't a date. It was a sentence. "You will never understand the land until it tests you, and the land does not test cowards." He flipped through the pages, each one more full than the last. Maps, symbols, the same carvings from the mine, notes about the watchers, about the gate, about the burden. His father hadn't just known, he de-documented it. Clara sat beside him. He wasn't perfect, God knows that, but he tried to carry it alone. Elijah nodded slowly. "And I mocked you for it, for staying, for carrying what I couldn't see." "You see it now," she said gently, "and you're still here." That night Elijah sat beneath the stars, the journal open in his lap. He didn't read, just held it. The sky above Coldridge was clear, and though no watchers stood at the edge of the trees, he could feel them in the bones of the hills, in the way the wind curved around the house as if avoiding what now stood upright in its place again. Not a home, a mark, not of ownership, but of choice. The next day, riders came. Not Bannock's men, not lawmen. Surveyors. 2 men in city coats, clean boots already caked with mud, eyes scanning the land like hawks measuring distance to prey. They dismounted at the fence line and called out, "Mr. Hollies." Elijah stepped from the porch slowly, coat slung over his shoulder, jaw clenched. "You're on my land," he said flatly. "We're with the State Land Office," one said, pulling out a document. "There's been interest in acquiring parcels along the old mine corridor. Folks are talking about a rail spur, maybe even a telegraph line." Elijah crossed his arms, not interested. "We're not here to buy," the second said quickly. "Just to assess. Ownership records have your mother's name and your own as joint custodians. You'd be entitled to significant payment if—" "No," Elijah said, "it's not for sale." The first man raised an eyebrow. "You sure? Most folks wouldn't turn down 5 figures for a burned-out hill." Elijah stepped closer. "It's not for sale." The surveyors exchanged glances. One nodded curtly, jotting something down. "Suit yourself," he muttered. "But word gets out, you might have more folks come knocking." "I've got a shotgun for every knocker," Elijah said. They rode off. That night he told Clara. "They'll be back," she said. "I know." "Then we need to remind them." Elijah hesitated. "How?" Clara pulled something from the shelf, an old brass plate, worn but still legible. It was the deed, signed in his mother's hand, amended with his own. He turned it over and scrawled 3 words into the back, deep enough to score the metal. "Not for sale." Then he nailed it to the gate. The next weeks passed quiet, then the letter came. It arrived without writer or postmark, just a folded envelope tucked beneath a stone on the front porch, sealed with wax so black it looked wet. Inside was no message, just a name. Clara. And beneath it another line. The price was never paid. She dropped the letter like it burned. "What is it?" Elijah asked. She didn't answer, just turned and walked into the cabin. That night she didn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table, staring into a cold lamp, hands clenched. In the morning she was gone. Elijah found her trail easy enough. She hadn't hidden it. Her steps led toward the ridge, toward the mine that no longer opened but still called. He saddled his horse and followed, jaw tight, heart pounding. He found her at the hollow. She stood on the edge, staring at the spot where the shaft had been. The ground there was smooth now, unnatural, not filled, he realized, but sealed. "What are you doing?" he called. She turned, face pale. "It was me." "What?" "It wasn't your father who sealed her in. It was me." Elijah stared. "She begged me," Clara whispered. "After the Watchers took her mind, after she couldn't stop screaming, she begged me to end it, to make it quiet, so I helped. I gave her to the stone, and then I buried the truth." He stepped toward her. "You did what you had to do." "No," she said. "I did what I was afraid to do. Now the Watchers want me to finish it." Elijah grabbed her arm. "We finished it together." Clara shook her head. "No, we just postponed it." The wind shifted, and the ground split open. It wasn't like before. There was no light, no thunder, just a sudden absence, a tear in the world, revealing stairs where none had been. Clara turned to him. "I have to go." "No," Elijah said, "I'll go." She smiled sadly. "It was never you they wanted. You just bore the name, but I buried the sin." She stepped into the dark. He tried to follow, but the stairs closed behind her. He pounded at the earth until his hands bled. The Watchers returned that night. All of them, standing in a ring around the house, around the ridge, around him. Elijah stepped outside, gun at his side, rage in his throat. "What do you want?" he shouted. One stepped forward and dropped something in the snow. Her locket. He fell to his knees. The Watcher spoke, not with words but with grief. "The debt is paid." Then they vanished. But the gate remained, wide and waiting. The sun rose on a land changed, not transformed in the way fire might burn down and rebuild, but in the quieter, deeper way, like grief aging into wisdom. The ridge held its silence like an oath. The trees swayed differently now, not nervously but with reverence. The Watchers were gone, but the ground they'd circled bore their weight still. Elijah Holly stood on the porch, Clara's locket clenched in his fist, and felt the ache of her absence pulse through his chest like a second heart. She hadn't returned. Days passed, then weeks. The hollow where the mine had reopened, where the watchers had taken her, sealed again as if nothing had ever stirred. The land forgot, but Elijah didn't. He couldn't. He went back every day, sat beside the smooth stone, now covered in moss, and waited for a sound, a breath, any sign. He brought the locket each time and set it in the dirt. Sometimes he'd speak to it. Sometimes he'd just hold it. Most days he'd just sit there in silence, as if silence might coax her back. But silence only gave him the truth. Clara was gone. Not taken, not like before. This time she'd chosen. She'd descended knowing full well the cost, and in doing so she'd paid a debt that had outlived generations. She'd ended a curse that had no name. It didn't feel like justice. It didn't feel like redemption. It felt like sacrifice. The deed still hung from the front gate, not for sale. Elijah didn't need it to remind him what the land cost. He carried that in his bones now. But the world beyond Coldridge didn't stop turning. Within a month another man came. A lawyer this time. Dapper suit, silver-tipped cane, words like silk laced with thorns. "I understand you've come into ownership of a rather lucrative parcel of mountain property," he said, voice polished and charming. "Old mineral rights. Abandoned but recently renewed under quiet filings. Something about a blood line, quite the inheritance." Elijah said nothing. The lawyer smiled as if he expected that. "We represent a party interested in developing the land. No extraction, nothing invasive, just a bit of development, roads perhaps, cabins for tourists. You'd retain a healthy stake, 10% if you'd like to remain involved. More if you're willing to step aside." Elijah leaned against the fence post, arms crossed. The man took it as interest. "You're sitting on something that could change the county, Mr. Hollis. You understand that, don't you? The soil under your boots is history waiting to be rewritten, but history is only valuable if someone tells it." Elijah stepped forward. "You want a story?" The man blinked. "Yes." Elijah's voice came low, cold. "Tell them the land don't want saving. Tell them it don't need taming. Tell them a woman gave up everything to keep what sleeps here asleep, and that no amount of money can buy what she left behind." The lawyer's smile faltered. "We can make a very generous offer." Elijah reached behind the fence, unslung the shotgun and leveled it over his shoulder, not pointing but not subtle either. "The answer's still no." The man swallowed, nodded, left. They kept coming. Different names, same suits, all smiles, all promises. Elijah turned them all away. They didn't understand. Maybe they never would. Maybe that was the point. There were some stories not meant for sale, some histories not meant to be rewritten, just remembered. And he remembered. Every morning he still walked the ridge, still carried the locket, still paused at the hollow. On the 50th morning since Clara descended, he found something different. A boot print. Small, barely there, but fresh. Elijah knelt, fingers brushing the outline in the dirt. No sound, no sign, but something moved in him. He went home, lit the lamp, sat at the table with his father's journal and began writing. Not what happened in the mine, that wasn't his to tell. But about Clara. He wrote her story as he knew it, the fire she carried, the silence she bore, the debts she paid and the home she built. He wrote about the locket, about the quiet, about the watchers not as monsters but sentinels of something older than fear. He wrote until the sun came up, until his hand ached, and then he bound the pages in leather and placed them on the shelf beside his father's. The Hollis legacy. Not land. Not deeds. But memory. That summer, Elijah opened the cabin door one evening and found a girl sitting on the porch steps. She was maybe 9, barefoot, freckled. Her hair was red like Clara's. She didn't flinch when he stepped out. "You lost?" he asked gently. She looked up. Her eyes were blue, unmistakably so. "No," she said, "I was sent." "By who?" The girl stood, dusted off her skirt. "A woman in the dark. She said I'd be safe here." Elijah's throat tightened. "What's your name?" The girl looked past him, toward the hollow, where the sun dipped low over the trees. "They call me Ivy," she said. He stared, heart caught somewhere between disbelief and hope. Then he opened the door. "Come in, Ivy." She smiled, walked past him. Her steps were light, familiar. Inside, the fire was warm, the lamp burned low, the wind had softened. That night Elijah sat at the table while Ivy curled up in the chair Clara once loved. She asked questions, not about ghosts or gold or history, but about her. The woman in the dark. She didn't call her Clara, she called her the lantern. "She carried light," Ivy whispered sleepily, "down there where no one else did." Elijah blinked hard, nodded. He didn't ask how Ivy knew. He didn't have to. The watchers never returned, not visibly, but Coldridge grew, quietly. Families came, not by train, not by force. They came because they'd heard stories, about a man who turned away wealth to protect something sacred, about a valley where silence wasn't empty, it was earned. Ivy grew quickly, sharp-minded, soft-hearted. She took to the trees like they remembered her, understood the land in ways Elijah never had. One day she brought home a rock shaped like a key and said, "This is for later." He didn't question it. She was 16 when she first walked the ridge alone. Elijah waited, watched. She came back. Each time. And every time she did, she brought something with her. A bird's feather, a perfect stone, a flower that bloomed too early. Signs, proof that the land still spoke. She was 19 when Elijah got sick. It came slow, like winter creeping into spring. He didn't fight it. He just taught her what she'd need to know, where the journal was, how to read the wind, how to listen when the trees went quiet. One night he called her to the porch. "You remember what I told you about the watchers?" he asked. She nodded. "They listen." "That's right," he said, "and one day they might call again." "What do I do?" "You choose." "Choose what?" He smiled faintly, whether to remember or forget. She sat beside him, took his hand. "I'll remember." He closed his eyes. He believed her. Years later, folks would say the Hollies' land was still haunted, that strange lights moved near the old mine, that a girl lived alone in a cabin on the ridge and didn't age like she should, that the trees whispered her name when the wind blew just right. They called her the lantern, too. Said she carried her uncle's legacy in her blood and her aunt's light in her eyes. And some swore that if you knocked on her door after sundown, she'd open it, even if she didn't know you, even if you were lost or scared or running from something you couldn't name. Because some things don't die. They just wait. For the right name. For the right choice. For the right remembering.